is no longer the injunction to control yourself, to repress your strivings or whatever. It's on the contrary, the injunction to enjoy it, to go to the end. This is what we feel guilty about today. And this, I think, also changes fundamentally the role of psychoanalysis. It does not make it outdated, it's more actual than ever. Only its function fundamentally changed. In the good old days, or so it appeared, now it's clear that it never was simply like that, the idea was the following one. Let's say you are sexually frustrated because you internalized some paternal or other prohibitions, you cannot enjoy sex, and the function of psychoanalysis is to release you of the pressure of this internalized prohibition, so you can let yourself go, you can enjoy. And in other words, you feel guilty if you transgress social prohibitions in order to enjoy. Today, it's almost the opposite. You feel guilty if you cannot make it, if you cannot enjoy. And we shouldn't take here enjoyment just in the immediate sense of sex, sexual pleasure, of drinking, whatever. It can be enjoyment of power, social success, professional success. It can be even spiritual enjoyment in the New Age sense, Gnostic sense of realizing your ego and so on and so on. What we are getting today is that you feel guilty if in this sense you cannot enjoy yourself. So this brings us, I claim, to a double function of psychoanalysis today. A, its message is not relax, get rid of prohibitions. Its message is, as Alain Badiou put it in wonderful terms, you should learn to become a pitiless censor of yourself. The role of psychoanalysis today, it's not to enable you to enjoy, but to open up a space in which you are allowed not to enjoy. That's the fundamental message of psychoanalysis today. You are not obliged to enjoy. You are allowed not to enjoy, which, of course, it's not the same as saying you are prohibited to enjoy. Just you are allowed not to enjoy. This confronts us furthermore with the paradoxes of today's superego, which is how, on the one hand, permissivity ends up in its opposite. Like today, the injunction is enjoy, the result is more prohibitions, regulations than ever. You can enjoy yourself, but in order to enjoy yourself properly, you are ordered to what? Not to eat too much, to engage in jogging, to take care of your fitness, not to smoke, and so on and so on. Just look around, and I think there is nothing more miserable today than those younger couples or people who organize their life in order to enjoy themselves. The regulation is total. On the other hand, we have the opposite paradox, which is that the so-called newly emerging fundamentalism is not here in order to introduce some new stability, to give you firm ethical foundation in today's world where there are no firm, stable values and so on. But on the contrary, I claim it is here to open up a kind of a false space of freedom. I'm referring here, of course, implicitly to Lacan's famous reversal of the Dostoevsky motto. According to Lacan, it is not that if God doesn't exist, everything is permitted, but if God doesn't exist, everything is prohibited. This is the lesson of the hedonistic yuppies. And the opposite lesson, no less crucial, if God exists, then everything is permitted. Which means, if you can justify your role as that of being the instrument of the divine will, in other words, you hear voices, you have the contact with the guy up there, either George Bush or Osama bin Laden. As many people notice, this is what they have in common. They both hear directly from up there. Then you can do whatever you want. You can do terrorist acts, bomb countries, and so on and so on. So here we see how difficult it is to orient ourselves in today's constellation where there is a certain urge to false freedom inherent to the system itself. Which is why I claim the main task today is to reinvent utopia, a space of utopia. What do I mean by this? It's not, of course, the old-fashioned utopia, which is the utopia of imagining ideal world about which we know in advance that it will never be realized. The big models here are, of course, Plato's Republic, Thomas More utopia, and we should not forget Marquis de Sade, philosophy in the boudoir. That's the classical utopia. Then we have what I'm tempted to call the capitalist utopia, this unbridled solicitation of new and new desires, which can go pretty far. Like today, I learned that in the United States, they are in some communities seriously considering the idea that necrophiliacs, those who want to play sexual games with corpses, dead bodies, are seriously deprived. So isn't it the duty of our society to provide them with corpses? Can it be done in some way so that people sign voluntarily in the same way that you sign that if you die, your heart, your organs can be used, that your body can be used to be delivered to necrophiliacs, and so on and so on. The problem here is that, radical as this may appear, there is something ridiculously benign about it, about this capitalist utopia. You can go to the end, basically nothing happens. But we have a third utopia, which is again neither this classical utopia of imagining an alternative universe, not even dreaming about really realizing it, then the capitalist utopia of ever new desires, extreme forms of satisfying your desires. There is a third mode which I would say is precisely the real core of utopia. I think a truly radical utopia is not an exercise in free imagination. Like you sit down, don't have anything wiser to do than to imagine possible ideal worlds. It's something that you do literally as out of an inner urge. You have to invent something new when you cannot do it otherwise. True utopia for me is not a matter of the future. It's something to be immediately enacted when there is no other way. Utopia in this sense simply means do what appears within the given symbolic coordinates as impossible. Take the risk, change the very coordinates. And I'm not talking here about something crazy. Even big classical, well-known, even sometimes conservative acts have this utopian dimension. Like, to take a ridiculous example, 30 years ago, remember Richard Nixon's trip to China. There was almost a utopian dimension to it. Why? Because he did what appeared as impossible. China was portrayed as the ultimate evil superpower. With Soviet Union there was the tent, not with China. That act changed the entire coordinates. It did the impossible. This is what we need more than ever today. Because ultimately, I claim, the true utopia today is not a different order. It's the idea that the existing order can function indefinitely. The true utopia, I claim, was not communism which disintegrated in 1989. It was the utopia of the 90s, the idea, elaborated among others by Francis Fukuyama, that we discovered the final social form, liberal capitalist democracy, that we cannot go further. That is just a question of making it a little bit more tolerant, spread it all around the world, but that we have the formula. And I think that if there is a symbolic meaning to September 11th, is that the time of that utopia is over. The real of history is back. Which is why today the urge is not to be terrorized by the so-called post-political politics, which tells us ideological times are over, all you can do is just to play the realistic game of accepting the trends and so on and so on. We should dare to enact the impossible. We should rediscover how to not imagine but enact utopia. The point is not again about planning utopias. The point is about practicing them. And I think this is not a question of should we do it or should we simply persist in the existing order. It's much more radical. It's a matter for survival. The future will be utopian or there will be none.